Okay, so my topic is supply chain. So the Google definition of supply chain is the sequence of processes involved in the production and distribution of a commodity. So basically, a commodity can be anything from eggs at a farmer's market to a complex thing such as a car. So for the eggs, for example, it is just a farmer getting the eggs from the chicken and then putting them in a 12 packet container and then putting it on the shelf in a farmer's market for all of us to eat. Whereas a car, something as complex as a car, all the parts come from around the world and they come to a singular location in the US where the car is later built and then put onto sale for all of us to buy. For our example of supply chain, we're going to use Ford Company and their cars. So this graph represents the flow of product. The flow of product goes from left to right. And as you can see here, we have these three factories located in different parts of the world, one in Germany, Mexico, and the US, and in different states in the US. Each of these factories create parts that Ford uses to make their cars. So in Germany, they make their compressors. In the US and Mexico, they make their motors. And then in different states, they create their wheels. And these arrows pointing into these factories are the different natural resources that these factories use to create their parts. And here we're only showing three, but a card is approximately around 1,800 parts. So there are 1,800 different factories that are creating these parts that Ford then uses to create their cars. So after these factories, the parts then go to Ford, where Ford tests them. They test the speed, their brakes, etc., and make sure that the car is working so the customer can then consume them. So from the car assembly plant, then I go to the dealership where the car is put on display, and then from the dealership it goes to the customer where the customer purchases the car. So the next big aspect of the supply chain is the flow of information. So first off, the flow of product actually is started from the left to right, as you can see by the arrow. But the flow of information actually starts from the customer and then goes all the way to these sub-factories. So the flow of information is basically information that the customer creates that lets the factories know what to base their parts or their cars out of. So if the customer, for example, wants a red car, the car assembly will start making red cars. Or if the customer wants, let's say, 4 doors, 2 doors, a faster car, then these sub-factories are going to create parts to create that type of car. So how did COVID affect the supply chain of the cars? So of course, with COVID, people lost their jobs, people are staying at home, and the demand for cars drastically increased. So with the demand of cars drastically decreasing, Ford said, hey, instead of working 365 days a year, let's only work 300. And this in turn led to a lot of people getting fired from Ford and the supply really going down of cars. So with the supply going down in the car assembly, that also meant that supply would decrease in these factories, which would ruin this whole supply chain. And it created a massive domino effect where the whole supply chain and its economy really would decrease and go down. And this all leads back to the consumer. So because the consumer's demand is super low, it affects the entire supply chain. So in my opinion, at first glance, what I thought supply chain was really just the flow of product, where you have your raw materials go into these factories, which create the parts, which then create the car, which then goes to the dealership, and then the customer. When in reality, it uses the flow of information plus the flow of product to maximize efficiency and help create easier lives for the customer, not just through the flow of product, but also through the opinions of the customers.